Greetings. This presentation concerns part 3 of the Gebusi in 2008 and 2013. Getting to Gebusi at this time was just the same in some ways as it had been before. You can see the untrammeled rainforest with the mountains of Mount Sisa on the left and Mount Basavi off the side to the right. And amazing at this late time to be able to see untrammeled rainforest for this expansive extent, a site that's rare to see these days in any world area. Now here we're approaching the Nomad airstrip, and you can see the line of demarcation between the primary forest in the back and the secondary forest that surrounds gardens and so on that are associated with the Nomad airstrip and the Nomad station. The Gebusi are just off to the right of this. They might be like over here in terms of where Gasumi Corners is located, and the Gebusi had transformed themselves very strongly in that area. So here Gebusi welcoming me at the airstrip on first arrival. And we're inspecting the airstrip because the airstrip is starting to get overgrown. It's very difficult to land. In fact, it was a very risky venture in order to land at all. Getting in and out through this airstrip has been increasingly difficult, as we'll see. I was amazed to see that the dilapidation of buildings and the departure of government officials in areas that were before teeming with life, and the government presence was just about completely gone. The ball field was overgrown, and you can see the dereliction, and the school, some of the buildings were in bad repair. The school was closed in many cases, or only a few teachers there. The airstrip getting worse and worse over time. This in 2013. It was very dangerous to land, and then since then has been closed permanently, which is really, really a major cutting off of connection between Gebusi and the outside world. The government station at Nomad, which was teeming with life, is now completely closed. There's no officer in charge, no radio operator, no policemen, no budgeting officers or other people there. So government services have really declined to almost zero. And here you can see the building just closed up. The Nomad Market, which was thriving twice a week on Tuesday and Friday, is vestigial. It's still going on, but with much less activity and fewer sales, and very, very difficult to make any money at all off of the trade of substance items that are sold there by women. And so here's the Nomad Market. And school, in some cases, is still going on, but with less energy than before, and with the hopes of getting advanced education at Nomad as a conduit to high school outside is increasingly difficult. Now here's Didika. Those who have learned to read and write in past decades still have that skill, and here he is holding the first edition of the book, the Gebusi, reading it, in fact, some parts of it himself, and this picture was on the cover of one of the subsequent editions of the book as well. And here's one of the Nofts. Didika named one of his children after me, and here he is as learning in one of the local bush schools, trying to keep up a little bit in education despite the lack of formal teaching at the Nomad government school. Now, subsistence has changed, and in many ways for the better. Here's a large garden cut right on the bank of the Coombe River, and you can see the expanse of it, and you can imagine how much easier it is to transport the crops directly into a canoe and float them downstream, and then to paddle back upstream with supplies and so on than it is to carry things overland. And the opening of the river itself creates a greater sunlight vantage point, so that the sun can pour down on the crops and grow them more quickly. So it's really a very adaptive way, and many parts of the riverbank are now strewn with gardens which are very plentiful, very large, and supply a lot of food. Now here you can see there's plenty of stretches of uncut gardening along the rivers as well, so that the environment has plenty of space for further horticulture and further demographic growth. So there's not a population problem or a scarce resource issue either. Gebusi have become more canoe people, as I mentioned in the third part of the book. Here's Huhua and Gwabi on a canoe. They really become very skilled, even in the larger rivers, with these keel-less canoes, and they're very stable on them. And their skills is much more developed, and they spend much more time on the river than they did in the earlier days, where making the effort of making such a large canoe and the risk of having it stolen or burned or lost was much greater than it is now with pacification and people more dependably controlling their resources. Another subsistence development has been the exponential growth of gardening sweet potatoes, which you see here in the lower right. These have been skinned, and sweet potatoes were a small crop that was a minor part of the diet in 1980 to 82, but now it's really a major starch staple and is very nutritious and has helped people with their nutrition and their overall health and well-being. House building is significantly the same as it used to be, although there are nails that are used now in many of the beams. You can see, for instance, nails here. These are all nailed as opposed to just lashing, where that would be the traditional method. But the large structure and overall pattern of dwellings is similar to the way it was, although they're much larger than they were before and constructed with a slightly modern style with nails. The rainforest is still very untrammeled from the ground as well as from the air. This is a photo taken from one of the longhouse open porches overlooking, facing from Gosumi Corners into the primary rainforest. Subsistence also includes foraging and hunting, in fact, more so than before, because without the government officials to supply such a cash economy for trading of selling of food at the nomad station, people are more pushed back on their own indigenous subsistence techniques. And here my GPS, Bubiai, is prying out Tahitian chestnuts out of a tree that he's cut them off from, and they're very nutritious, and he saved a bunch of them for to give to the people in the village we were walking to visit. Canoeing along the river, here's Sayu. Canoeing us up to the old site of Yibihilu, where I used to live back in 1980 to 82, and so many things overgrown. And the growth of the population is quite strong. Children are in larger numbers than ever before. Family sizes are increasing. And despite the relative lack of healthcare facilities or aid posts, children are in relatively good health because of good nutrition. And there is some inoculations by some of the Catholic nuns who still are heroically keeping up some dimensions of childhood healthcare. So the large numbers of children create much greater size of families than was the case before. And birth spacing is not so important to maintain because there's so much food that's available up and down the river and in gardens. So the birth spacing is reduced, and even twins can sometimes survive and be nourished and survive to adulthood. So there's a tremendous growth in the youth of the population and a growth of the population overall. In the midst of this, it's very wonderful for me to go back and to visit friends. This is Kul, an older man from the Yehebi village who I hadn't seen in a number of years. And you can see from his musculature that he's been quite continually good at hunting protein in the deep rainforest, pig and cassowary and so on. He's a traditional, very good hunter, and his physique kind of shows off the protein that he's been able to have, and the joy and fun of being able to go back and meet people again after years of absence. Now, another thing which is more traditional than it used to be relative to 1998 is that women often go bare-breasted, and they're not ashamed at this. They really feel that they don't have a lot of clothes, and if they're far away from the nomad station, they're getting more on their own devices, so there are traditional aspects which are resuscitated in some ways, and styles of clothing and going around without worrying about being covered up quite as much as the case before. Certainly, she wouldn't appear like this if she was going to the nomad station, but in the village it's quite acceptable. Now, some of the larger features of how the cash economy and the outside contact of nomad have declined so radically is related to the large gold and copper mine, which is in the province in which the Gebusi reside. So the Gebusi are located in this map approximately here. And it's quite a far distance to the Oktedi mine. It certainly would be like a 2 or 3 weeks walk and very unfeasible. But this is the mine site itself. The top of the mountain has literally been decapitated because it's full of gold and copper. But the benefit of this in terms of profits for the company and the country of Papua New Guinea, which owns a large stake, and the proceeds which trickle down in terms of tax payments and royalties to the province, is very important to sustain the provincial economy, including the funding of the Nomad airstrip and the provision of government wages and so on. But this has had a very difficult result. You can see the scale of the mining equipment relative to, this is a local man from this area dressed with a penis gourd and bow and arrow posing in front of a huge truck that transports the raw ore down a long road all the way to the Fly River, where it can be transported on barges for further processing. But the tailings of the dam and the toxic sediments and heavy metal wastes that are spewed out of the dam have caused huge ecocide and the destruction of one of the largest river systems in the riverine world, in the tropical world. And you can see the dieback of some of the trees along the riverbank and the pollution of the riverbank and the collapse of the subsistence economy for people that live along the river. Now this is a river that does not feed into the tributaries of the Gebusi area. So the Gebusi are not at all directly affected by this, but it's quite a huge problem, and the mine is at pains to rectify it because the cost of trying to control these ecological damages that the mine has caused. So the government's very dependent on the resources and royalties of the mine, but they're very sandwiched between that and the ecological degradation. In fact, the mining company has sold the mine to the Papua New Guinea government, which is now in charge, and they can't really close it because they need the proceeds, even though it's causing such horrible ecological destruction. It's really quite bad. Now, from the Gebusi perspective, this is back from one of the drawings of one of the children in school back in 1998. He wanted to be, his future plan was to be a mine worker with a smiling sun and the red bird of paradise and the healthy tree. And there's one of those trucks that you saw. But in fact, the reality is that the mine has been really a total albatross in terms of ecological pollution. And now that the royalties of the mine are going down, the trickle of resources that allowed Nomad Station to stay open are drying up. And so the outside funding for to keep the station open is really at huge risk. And the government has basically closed down, and the airstrip as well. So this is the town of Kiunga, which is the depot from where the ore from the large mine site distant is trucked down to. It's a large river, and there's several thousand people. And this is the town that Gebusi think of as being the Emerald City that's about a number of days to walk away and very difficult to get to, especially without any plane service. But it does have stores, of which there are none at Nomad. And so the possibility of getting all these possible goods, you can see a guitar in the background, there's sports balls, all sorts of items. But people go there to see, but they often don't have money to buy much. So it's quite a whiplash of expectation between being exposed to the possibility of these great items and not having the cash economy to actually obtain them, much less bring them back to Gosumi Corners. Now back in Gosumi Corners, one can see the village path and a new kind of house on stilts in a more Western style in the distance. And so Gebusi are thrown back very much on their own devices. So here's Moose, a woman who is now elderly and has grandchildren, but she's still quite strong. You can see she's carrying several net bags, including one of firewood and others of bananas, and she's very robust. So Gebusi, on their own devices, even apart from the collapsing cash economy, are doing quite well on their own devices. Here's a photo of Sayo, who's showing the pictures of him in the Exchanging the Past book that I published in 2002, showing a picture of himself on the left as a young boy of about 5 with a toy bow and arrow, and when he was a young strapping bachelor of 19. And now he's got 7 children of his own, so you can see the chronological shift portrayed in this photograph. Now here's Sayo with some of his children and his mother-in-law on the left. And this is a kind of arrangement domestically that you wouldn't have seen back in the early 1980s. A man with his mother-in-law and his children in close proximity in the same house, not as much subdivision between male and female spaces as was previously the case. And here's his wife, Dong Sop, with a newborn baby that was named after my co-worker who was there in the field, Latham Wood. So that's Latham in the lower center. and another another child of hers in her lap. So having lots of children and having them not be as stowed away in terms of hidden because of pollution beliefs. So the gender division between men and women has broken down a lot, and there's much less fear of contamination or of separation between men and women than there was before. More casual conversations. It's still inappropriate for an unrelated man and woman to talk too flirtatiously, but there's much the softening of the gender boundaries between men and women is quite palpable. Now, in terms of the church, the local pastors are now more local. The Catholic priests and so on are there only occasionally, and this is Yamda, who is, or Luke as he's known in Christian parlance, who is the lay pastor or the lay leader of the Catholic Church. And you can see the well-printed document in English here in January 2009. We are parishioners, our friends, encourage everyone to become so and so forth, carrying out the will of God. And here's a service. Now, the interest in Catholicism and in Christianity generally has somewhat reduced because the power of the church, the money available along with the cash economy has declined. So people don't go as frequently. It's not as well attended. The activities are not as prominent. And here you see yours truly in the front with my little camp chair, and Latham took this picture from the back of the church on a Sunday morning. The music in church now combines the string band singing that you see in that's developed, that was prominent in 1998, and these are some of the same players that are harmonizing and singing at night in a longhouse, but they also play in church. And as well, the traditional dancing, still not too common anymore, but still sometimes occurring. And here's a traditional dancer in full costume in one of the larger houses in Gasumi Corners in 2008, I believe it is. Now, tobacco smoke, pipe smoking. Here, you can see Harlehuan, or my Honsohui, gift exchange name, is smoking from the large tobacco pipe. The hole in the bottom there is where the tobacco, the wad is put in and then smoke through, so the smoke fills the pipe and then drawn out. So traditional tobacco smoking is much more common now than it was in 1998. Another custom that's kind of had a resurgence in the local population. And then traditional joking. Now this is Masamiai. He's hamming it up. This is a canoe that's being dug out, and you can see Sayo and Keida and Kamu are kind of teasing him as if they're going to grab his genitals, as kind of a joking gesture of male sexual horseplay that they're pantomiming here. And there's a lot of goodwill and banter among men. Not evidence of actual homosexuality much, but a lot of joking play around the possibility thereof. So the sense of good company and of men, particularly men, collaborating together, having a good time, smoking, enjoying themselves is very prominent among Gebusi, more so as a collectivity than it was in 1998. So some features of their traditional or their long-standing customs and belief have actually had a resurgence, what I never would have expected back in 1998. So the idea there's a unidirectional line of progress and modernity to the future has really been countermanded by Gebusi being thrown back more on their own devices, more on their traditional subsistence, and at least some of their indigenous customs are coming much more fully back to the fore during this period, and actually since 2013 as well. Joking at night around the resin lantern, the resin lamp, I should say, is very prominent. This is a blurry picture, but this is Harlehuan again joking with Fokai and one of the other members of the community together, horseplay and joking around, kind of gathering around the fire as in the traditional older days, sharing stories, joking, sharing tales, and so on and so forth, still very important. Now, what's happened to Gebusi rate of killing, the rate of homicide? And reprising from before, we can see that in the pre-colonial era, again, the rate of homicide was enormous, 39% of all adult deaths, and that had declined during the Australian period of colonization, and then again during the early period of Papua New Guinea. But it's declined, and then since 1998, it's been zero. It's been zero. So the decline to zero homicide is a very, very important and significant development that has continued. The decline has been zeroed out since 1988, and as far as I know, even to the present, there has not been a single killing of an adult or anyone among Gebusi, despite the continuing belief in sorcery accusations, sorcery in a more vestigial way. So here's a new generation of Gebusi children who will determine the fate of their future. And we can see the transformation between, here's Yuak in the upper left back in 1981 and in 2013. So the changes among Gebusi are certainly going on continually. And as we might say, it's never the end. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned.